The morning Kyle Mercer called his uncle a liar, the only one who moved to defend the old man was the German shepherd. The proof did not come from a courtroom, a medal, or a perfect record. It came from an old green jacket everyone else had mistaken for trash. 66-year-old Daniel Mercer stood in the middle of his garage with grease on his hands, pain in his left knee, and a sealed envelope trembling between his fingers. "You said you kept your promise," Kyle said. "So why was this letter never mailed?" Daniel could not answer fast enough. Atlas, his German shepherd, stood over the fallen jacket with his paws planted on the concrete, as if the dog had known for years that the truth was hidden in that sleeve. 6 hours earlier, before the town's first school bus passed the highway, Daniel had opened Mercer Auto and Small Engine Repair the way he opened it every day, with no ceremony and no complaint. The sign outside still read Mercer Auto and Small Engine Repair, though the paint had begun to peel, and the last 2 letters of repair flickered only when the old wiring felt generous. Daniel fixed customer trucks, lawn mowers, old generators, and the rusted hinges on neighbors' gates, but he let his own place age without demanding attention, as if he believed dignity mattered more than appearance. People in town knew him as the quiet man with the stiff knee, the silver at his temples, and the German shepherd that never left his side. They knew he had once been Special Forces, though most of them said the words like a rumor rather than a fact. They knew he woke from bad dreams often enough that the diner waitress across the road sometimes saw his workshop light burning after midnight. They knew he kept an old green military jacket hanging from a peg above his workbench and never let anyone touch it. From those pieces, they built the kind of story people build when they are too lazy to ask real questions. Some called him proud, some called him strange. His nephew called him stuck in the past. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and glanced toward the jacket on the wall. He did that every morning. Not because he was sentimental in the easy way people assumed, but because the jacket was the one thing he had never managed to put in a box. The olive fabric had faded at the shoulders. One cuff was frayed. The zipper had been replaced twice. To anyone else, it looked like old cloth that had outlived its purpose. To Daniel, it was the last object that still seemed to carry the shape of a promise. Kyle walked in carrying 2 cardboard boxes and a roll of packing tape. "What's all that for?" Daniel asked. "I told you last week," Kyle said. "I'm helping you clear this place out. You can't keep every broken thing forever." "Then I'm not talking about those." Kyle pointed toward the shelves, the dented lockers, the old radio parts, the coffee tins full of screws, and finally the jacket on the peg. "I'm talking about the junk you keep because you think it means something." Daniel straightened slowly. "That jacket stays where it is." Kyle laughed under his breath. "It's an old coat, Uncle Dan. It smells like dust and motor oil. You haven't worn it in years." Daniel said nothing. He returned to the workbench, hoping silence would end it. But silence, around the wrong kind of person, only sounds like permission. Kyle filled the first box with cracked tool catalogs, a broken lamp, and a tin coffee mug with no handle. Daniel let him take those. Then Kyle moved to the pegboard wall. He reached up, took the jacket down, and shook it once, as if proving how useless it was. Atlas moved before Daniel did. The dog crossed the garage in 3 quick strides and caught the sleeve of the jacket gently but firmly in his mouth. Not a wild bite, not aggression, a refusal. He planted his paws and pulled backward. Kyle jerked in surprise. "What the hell is wrong with your dog?" he snapped. "Nothing is wrong with him," Daniel said. "Put it back." Kyle tugged the jacket away from Atlas. "This is exactly what I mean. You've got the dog acting like this rag is some sacred relic." Atlas did not bark. He did not lunge. He circled once, eyes fixed on the jacket, then pressed himself between Kyle and the donation box. His body formed a line no one had invited him to draw, but one he intended to hold. Instead, Kyle rolled his eyes and stuffed the jacket into the second box. "No. I'm doing you a favor. You don't need this stuff weighing you down." Aunt Melissa said the same thing. "You live in here like a shrine keeper." Atlas made a low sound in his throat and lowered his head toward the box. Daniel took one step forward, but his knee buckled just enough to slow him. In that second, Atlas thrust his muzzle into the box, seized the sleeve again, and dragged the jacket back out onto the floor. The movement was so quick the box tipped sideways. Packing tape rolled across the concrete. Kyle cursed. Then something small and cream-colored slipped from inside the lining and landed near Daniel's boot. For a moment, nobody moved. Atlas released the sleeve and stood over the jacket, breathing hard through his nose. Daniel stared at the object on the floor. It was an envelope, worn soft at the edges, yellowed by time and sealed. His own handwriting stared back at him from the front. He had not seen that envelope in more than 30 years. Kyle bent first. "What is that?" Daniel's chest tightened. On the front of the envelope was a woman's name he had not spoken aloud in decades, and beneath it, an address in a town 3 states away. The stamp had never been canceled. The letter had never been mailed. Kyle picked up the envelope, his expression changing from irritation to curiosity. "You kept a letter in there all this time?" Daniel swallowed once. "Give it to me." Kyle did not. "Who is Emily Rourke?" The name struck Daniel harder than the winter air. Emily Rourke, widow of Michael Rourke, the man Daniel had once called his brother, long before life had taught him how expensive promises could become. Daniel looked at the sealed envelope in his hands. 30 years of dust had hidden it. 30 years of silence had built a wall around it, and now his dog had torn a hole straight through both. "I tried," Daniel said. Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Tried? Uncle Dan. All these years you said you kept your word." Atlas remained pressed against Daniel's leg, not leaving, not looking away. Inside the garage, Daniel held the unopened letter like it was something alive, something capable of accusing him all over again. Daniel closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, Atlas was still watching him with the same unwavering attention he had given the jacket, the box, and now the letter itself. It was not the look of an animal guarding an object. It was the look of a witness refusing to let a man stand alone in the worst memory of his life. And for the first time in years, Daniel understood that the jacket had not survived because he was weak. It had survived because the truth inside it had never stopped waiting. After Kyle left the garage, he did not take the jacket, but he took something worse. He took the unfinished shape of the truth and carried it straight into the family. Daniel sat on the rolling mechanic's stool with the sealed envelope in his lap, Atlas lying close enough that one paw touched Daniel's boot. The garage heater clicked and groaned. Everything smelled of oil, old rubber, cold coffee, and the dusty scent from the torn jacket lining. Daniel had planned to open the envelope as soon as Kyle left. He told himself that a man who had taken engines apart in the dark should be able to tear one piece of paper. But his thumb would not break the seal. He remembered Michael in Small Human Pieces, Michael humming off-key while shaving. Michael once saying, "If anything ever happens, Dan, do not let Emily hear it from some office." Daniel had said, "She will hear it from me." Atlas lifted his head when Daniel's breathing changed. The dog rose, came close, and pressed his shoulder into Daniel's shin. Daniel placed one hand on the broad head and felt the warmth there. He kept dog biscuits in a red coffee tin near the bench, and even now, before touching the envelope again, he opened the tin and gave Atlas one. Routine first. Care first. That was how Daniel survived mornings when memory tried to take the room away from him. "You knew, didn't you?" Daniel whispered. Atlas chewed once, then rested his chin beside the jacket. The side door opened without a knock. Kyle came back in with his mother, Melissa. Her eyes went to the envelope first, then to the jacket, then to Daniel. "Kyle told me," she said. "I figured he would." Kyle stood behind her with his arms crossed. "He needs to explain it." Daniel's jaw tightened. I do not answer to you in my own garage." Melissa held up one hand. "Nobody wants a fight." Atlas stood, not aggressive, not loud, just standing. His body moved between Daniel and the two visitors. Melissa noticed because loyalty made some people uncomfortable when it was not pointed at them. "Daniel," she said carefully, "Michael Rourke's name has been in this family for 30 years. We all believed you had done what you promised. I did what I could. Kyle scoffed. That is not the same. No, Kyle said. If you never mailed the letter, then maybe you let everyone think you were honorable because it sounded better. The words landed hard. Daniel stood, slow and uneven, one hand around the envelope, the other on the bench. You think honor is a story? Daniel asked. Kyle did not back down. I think people hide behind it. Melissa looked frightened by what her son had said, but she did not correct him. That was what hurt Daniel most. Daniel looked at his sister. You believe that? Melissa's eyes softened, but not enough. I believe you have carried something too long. And when men carry things too long, they start shaping the facts around the pain. There it was. Not shouted, not cruel on the surface. Worse, reasonable, polite. Daniel looked down at the envelope. The letter was not the only thing. Kyle frowned. What does that mean? Daniel turned toward the old metal cabinet beside the compressor. The bottom drawer stuck if pulled too hard, so he eased it open with 2 fingers. Inside were oil-stained manuals, a flashlight, and a small wooden box with a cracked brass latch. Melissa inhaled. I have never seen that. No, Daniel said. You have not. He set the box on the bench. Atlas moved closer, sniffed once, then sat beside it as if taking up post. Daniel opened it. Inside was not treasure, no dramatic certificate ready to solve everything. Just pieces of a life people had reduced to rumors. A faded photograph of Daniel and Michael after both men had come home. A torn return envelope addressed to Daniel, stamped but never delivered, marked with a faded postal sticker. At the bottom, folded in wax paper, sat a small brass locker key. Kyle leaned in. So you had more proof hidden too? Daniel looked at him. Proof of what? That you meant to do it. Daniel shook his head. Meaning to do right is not the same as doing it. I know that better than you. Melissa touched the torn return envelope. This was sent back? Daniel nodded. Months later. Why didn't you tell us? Because by then Emily Rourke was gone from that address. Because the number Michael gave me was disconnected. Because every time I tried to explain, people heard an excuse instead of a search. Kyle looked from the returned envelope to the sealed letter. His certainty flickered. Then why hide it in the jacket? Daniel's face changed. Older somehow, because I was ashamed I had not found her. Atlas lifted one paw and placed it on the edge of the jacket. The key, Melissa said. Her voice quieter now. What does it open? Daniel took the brass key from the box. A paper tag dangled from it, brittle with age. The writing had faded, but 3 words remained clear enough to read. Union Station Locker. Kyle stared. There is a train station locker involved? There was, Daniel said. A long time ago, and you never opened it. I went once. It was sealed for renovation. Then the station closed. Then the building sat empty for years. I thought whatever was inside was gone. Daniel rubbed his thumb over the key. Michael said he kept something there for Emily. Something he did not want mailed. Something only she should have. Kyle's voice lost some of its edge, so the letter was only part of the promise. Daniel nodded. The letter told her where to go. The locker held the rest. Then Kyle said the thing that would push the whole story beyond the family. If that station is still standing, we should go. Daniel looked up. Kyle quickly added, not because I believe you, because if there is nothing there, this ends today. No, Mom. If there is a locker, let us see it. If there is nothing, we stop pretending the jacket is sacred. Atlas stood again and placed his body in front of the jacket. Daniel picked up the key. It was small enough to disappear in his fist, but heavy with everything left unresolved. All right, he said. Daniel folded the letter and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Then he lifted the old green jacket from the bench. For the first time in years, he put it on. Atlas stepped to the door before anyone else moved. The letter had been found. The promise had not. And somewhere in a closed train station at the edge of town, there might still be one piece of the truth that could decide whether Daniel Mercer had failed his friend or whether the world had stopped listening before he finished keeping his word. The old station had not carried passengers in 12 years, but everyone still called it Union Station because nobody in town wanted to admit how much had left and never returned. It sat beyond the feed store and the empty warehouse, a brick building with boarded ticket windows, A clock stopped at 20 after 3, and weeds growing where taxis once waited. Daniel parked his faded blue pickup near the chain-link gate and sat with both hands on the wheel. Atlas stood in the back seat, nose lifted toward the broken windows. Kyle got out first. He looked at the building, then at his phone. "This place is condemned." "Then do not go in," Daniel said. "That is not what I meant." Melissa hugged her coat around herself. "Daniel, maybe we should call someone from the town office." "We will," Daniel said. "But first I need to see whether the lockers are still there." Kyle shook his head. "You said it closed decades ago." Daniel opened the truck door slowly. His knee had stiffened during the drive, and the cold made it worse. Atlas jumped down after a quiet hand signal, then circled to Daniel's left side. The dog did not pull. He matched the old man's pace, as if every limp had been memorized. The main doors were chained, but the side entrance near the baggage ramp had a loose panel. Daniel did not force it. He only stared at the rusted padlock and warning sign. Kyle folded his arms. "Now what?" Daniel looked across the street. Red's Diner was still there. The owner, Ruth Callahan, was unlocking the front door when she saw Daniel and froze. Ruth was 78, small, sharp-eyed, and too proud to use the cane behind the counter. She crossed the street in a thin cardigan. "Danny Mercer," she called. "You better not be thinking of crawling into that death trap." Daniel managed the faintest smile. "Morning, Ruth." Her eyes dropped to the old jacket, then to Atlas, then to the brass key in Daniel's hand. The smile left her face. "Where did you get that?" "It was in my cabinet." Ruth's voice changed. "Is that Michael Rourke's key?" Kyle stared at her. "You know about this?" Ruth looked only at Daniel. "I thought you gave that to his wife." Daniel's throat worked once. "I tried to find her." Ruth closed her eyes. "Lord help us." Kyle stepped closer. "What exactly did you know?" Ruth turned on him. "Enough to know your uncle did not invent Michael Rourke to make himself sound important." Atlas stood between Daniel and the station, head lifted, ears forward. His nose worked the air near the loose panel. Then he gave one soft whine. Ruth heard it. "That dog remembers grief better than half this town remembers names." "He has never been here," Kyle said. Daniel looked at Atlas. "No, but he knows me." Ruth led them back to the diner because hard truths needed hot coffee, witnesses, and a table sturdy enough for old paper. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon grease, lemon cleaner, and coffee. Ruth locked the door and turned the sign back to closed. She poured coffee for Daniel and Melissa, water for Kyle, and set a metal bowl on the floor for Atlas. "Sit," she told Daniel. He sat in the corner booth, closest to the window, facing the station. Atlas settled beside him, but kept his eyes on the old building across the road. Ruth returned from the back room with a red binder thick with clippings, funeral programs, and photographs saved by one woman who never trusted institutions to remember correctly. She opened the binder to a yellowed clipping. In the grainy photograph, Daniel stood younger and thinner beside Michael Rourke. Neither man smiled. Emily stood near them with one hand on Michael's sleeve. Daniel touched the edge of the page, but not the picture. "That was the last time I saw her," he said. Ruth nodded. "She left town a few weeks later." Kyle leaned over the table. "Why?" Ruth looked at Daniel before answering. "Because people can be cruel when grief needs somebody to blame." Melissa sat very still. "Blame for what?" Ruth turned another page. This one held a small church bulletin. Michael's name was printed in the center. Beneath it, in smaller letters, was a line thanking Daniel Mercer for escorting personal effects to the family. Kyle read it twice. "Personal effects?" Daniel closed his eyes. Ruth said, "Michael left some things at the station locker. I heard it from him myself before he left the last time. He said if anything happened, Danny would know what to do." Kyle looked at Daniel. "Then why didn't you?" Daniel's hand tightened around the coffee cup. "Because when I got back, Emily had already received notice. By the time I reached town, people here had told her a dozen versions. Some said Michael suffered because I made a mistake. Some said I came home and he did not because I was lucky. Some said I should have done more." "You never said that," Melissa whispered. Daniel looked at his sister. "Would you have known what to do with it?" She looked away. Ruth slid the clipping toward Kyle. Your uncle came to my counter with that same jacket on, carrying a letter and a key. He asked where Emily had gone. I did not know. Nobody knew. She had packed at night and left no address. Daniel's voice was low. I wrote to the last address Michael gave me. The letter came back. I tried the number. Disconnected. I checked where I could. Then the station closed. Kyle was quiet now, but not convinced. And after that, Daniel looked out the window toward the station. After that, I kept looking in small ways until small ways started feeling like excuses. Atlas rose suddenly. His ears sharpened. His nose pointed toward the window. Across the street, near the station's side entrance, a white municipal truck had pulled up. A man in a hard hat stepped out and began removing the warning sign from the gate. Ruth moved to the window. "That is Tom Adler from Public Works." Kyle frowned. "Why is he here?" Ruth's face went pale. "Because they are starting demolition prep." Daniel stood too fast, pain flashing through his knee. The brass key slipped from his hand and hit the diner floor. Atlas picked it up gently by the paper tag before anyone else could reach it, then carried it straight to Daniel and pressed it into his palm. Daniel looked at the dog, then at the station, then at the sealed letter in his shirt pocket. For 30 years, the truth had waited behind rust, silence, grief, and a locked door. Now the building that might hold Michael Rourke's final gift was being measured for destruction. And Daniel Mercer, accused that morning of hiding behind honor, had until the end of the day to prove some promises do not die, simply because everyone else stops. Looking, Ruth unlocked the diner door so quickly the bell above it struck the glass twice. "Tom," she shouted across the street, "do not cut that lock yet." The man in the hard hat paused with bolt cutters in his hands. He looked at Ruth, then at Daniel, then at Kyle and Melissa behind him. "Ruth, I have a work order," Tom called back. "Environmental check today. Interior clearing tomorrow. Demolition after inspection." Daniel reached the gate with Atlas at his side and the brass key in his palm. "I need access to the locker wall," Daniel said. Tom frowned. "There is no public access. Building is posted unsafe." Kyle stepped forward. "There may be personal property inside." "Old property." Tom gave him a dry look. Everything in there became town property after the closure. Daniel felt the words hit the old place like a second lock. Town property, abandoned property, unsafe structure. The language people used when paper wanted to erase a human trace. Ruth crossed her arms. "Tom Adler, you know who this is." Tom looked at Daniel longer. Recognition came slowly, then discomfort. "I respect you, Mr. Mercer," he said, "but I cannot let people wander inside." Atlas moved to the gate and sniffed along the bottom rail. His nose stopped near a gap where wind pushed dust through the loose panel. The dog gave a short, sharp whine, then pawed once at the ground. Daniel looked down. "What is it?" Atlas pressed his nose to the gap again. Then he turned to Daniel with the same fixed look he had given the jacket. Kyle noticed. "He smells something," Tom sighed. "It is an old station. He probably smells raccoons." "No," Daniel said. "He knows the jacket. He knows the envelope. If he is reacting to that door, something inside carries the same scent." Kyle looked ready to dismiss it, but the morning had already taken too much certainty from him. Ruth pointed to the work order. "Call the town manager. Tell her there is a possible personal effects claim before demolition." Tom stepped away with his phone. While they waited, Daniel leaned against the gate. Melissa came beside him. "You never told me people blamed you," she said. "You were 19. Dad was sick. Mom was trying to keep the house. I thought silence was easier." "For whom?" He did not answer. Tom returned after several minutes. "Town manager says no entry without a staff escort and liability waiver. 10 minutes only. If the floor looks bad, we leave." Tom unlocked the side gate, then the chained door. Cold air came out, carrying the smell of wet brick, dust, rust, and something paper dry beneath it. Atlas stepped in first, but Daniel stopped him with a quiet hand. "Slow," Daniel said. The dog slowed. Inside, the station looked smaller than memory but heavier than dust. Old benches sat beneath a cracked timetable board. The ticket windows were blind with grime. A faded sign still pointed toward baggage claim and lockers. Daniel's breath caught. For one moment, He was younger, wearing the same jacket without the frayed cuff, carrying a letter he believed he still had time to deliver. Kyle's voice pulled him back. "Where are the lockers?" Daniel pointed. "Past baggage claim." Tom led with a flashlight. "Watch your step. No touching loose wires." They moved slowly. Daniel's knee complained with every step. Melissa stayed near his right side. Kyle held the flashlight on the floor, no longer looking bored. Atlas walked with his nose low, then raised it when they reached the locker corridor. Most of the lockers were gone. Daniel stopped. A metal frame ran along one wall where rows of doors had been removed. Only a few remained near the corner, rusted and tagged with faded numbers. Kyle whispered, "Which one?" Daniel looked at the paper tag on the key. Age had eaten most of the writing. Only a smudged number remained. It could have been 41, it could have been 71. His hand shook. Atlas moved forward before anyone spoke. The dog sniffed along the remaining lockers, passed the first two, ignored the third, then stopped at the last door near the floor. He pressed his nose to the seam and lay down in front of it. Tom shined the flashlight. Number 41. Daniel closed his hand around the key. Kyle breathed out. "No way." Daniel knelt slowly, wincing as his knee bent. Atlas stayed beside him, shoulder touching his arm. The key fought the lock at first. Rust resisted. Daniel almost stopped. Then Kyle crouched beside him. "Let me try?" Daniel looked at him. Kyle added, quieter, "Not to take it, just to help." Daniel handed him the key. Kyle worked it gently, careful now, patient in a way he had not been in the garage. The lock turned with a sound like a cough. The locker door opened 3 inches and stuck. Atlas sniffed once and gave a soft whine. Inside was not a treasure box. It was an old canvas pouch, gray with dust, wrapped in a cracked plastic dry bag. A small tag was tied to the zipper with darkened string. The name on the tag was still readable, for Emily. Daniel did not touch it immediately. Kyle turned toward him, and for the first time that day, there was no accusation in his face. Tom removed his hard hat. Melissa covered her mouth. Ruth, standing at the end of the corridor despite promising to wait outside, whispered, "Michael did leave something." Daniel reached into the locker and lifted the pouch with both hands. It weighed almost nothing, yet his shoulders bent under it. Atlas stood, pressed his nose to the pouch, then stepped back and sat. Daniel unzipped it. Inside lay a small folded scarf, a black and white photo strip of Michael and Emily laughing in a bus station booth, and a second envelope sealed in plastic. This one was addressed in Michael Rourke's handwriting. "Emily, if Daniel brings this, know he kept his word." No one spoke. Kyle stared at the sentence until the color left his face. The old accusation that had formed so easily in the garage now had to stand in the same room as Michael's handwriting. Daniel held the envelope like a man afraid it would break. Tom cleared his throat. "This changes the work order." Ruth looked at him. "It changes more than that." But Daniel was no longer looking at the locker, the envelope, or the others. He was looking at Atlas. The dog had not found gold. He had not found revenge. He had found the one thing no younger man, no town form, and no bitter rumor had been able to see. A promise had been waiting exactly where Daniel said it was. And now they had to find the woman who had spent 30 years never knowing that she had not been forgotten. By noon, the canvas pouch sat on Ruth Callahan's diner counter under the yellow light like something too fragile for the day that had found it. Nobody ate. Ruth had made grilled cheese because she believed grief should never be handled on an empty stomach, but the sandwiches cooled untouched beside 4 cups of coffee and 1 bowl of water for Atlas. Daniel sat in the corner booth with the old green jacket still on his shoulders. Across from him, Kyle kept looking at the second envelope, then away, then back again. "Emily, if Daniel brings this, know he kept his word." Those words had done what Daniel never could. They had made the room quiet. Melissa turned the photo strip over in her hands. 4 small images. Michael and Emily crowded into a bus station photo booth. In the first frame, Michael was serious, and Emily laughed. In the last, Michael had his forehead pressed against hers. Kyle exhaled. "We found the pouch. We found the message. That proves Uncle Dan was telling the truth about the locker, but it does not tell us where Emily went. Daniel looked at him. No, it does not. Kyle's eyes dropped. I did not mean it that way. Yes, you did. Kyle swallowed. I was wrong about the jacket. Daniel gave a faint nod. That is different from being wrong about me. Atlas lifted his head at the change in Daniel's voice. The dog rose from beside the booth and slid his body between Daniel and the aisle, because pain had entered the room in a tone Atlas recognized. Tom Adler, still standing near the counter in his work vest, shifted uncomfortably. I can ask the town manager to pause the demolition for 48 hours while this is documented. Tom pointed to the pouch. Photographs. A written inventory. A witness note saying where it was found and who was present. Not a legal miracle, just a record so nobody can say Mr. Mercer invented it later. Daniel's eyes moved to him. Thank you. Ruth photographed the locker key, the tag, the pouch, the scarf, the photo strip, and Michael's sealed envelope. Daniel would not let anyone break the seal. That is Emily's, he said. Melissa touched Daniel's sleeve. What if we cannot find her? Daniel looked through the diner window toward Union Station. Then I keep looking until I cannot. You have already looked for 30 years. No, Daniel said. I carried guilt for 30 years. Looking is what we start doing now. Ruth pulled out a church bulletin from her binder and tapped a name printed near the bottom. Miriam Bell. She handled notices for the church back then. If Emily left town, Miriam may have forwarded something. Kyle checked his phone. There is a Miriam Bell at Sunny Acres Assisted Living. Daniel stood. Melissa frowned. You need to rest your knee. I can rest when I have an answer. Atlas stepped toward the door before anyone else moved. At Sunny Acres, the lobby smelled of floor wax, soup, and artificial flowers. Daniel hated places where old people were spoken to in bright voices. He kept one hand near Atlas's harness strap, not for control, but for balance. Miriam Bell sat near a window with a blue blanket over her knees. She was small now, but her eyes were clear when Ruth said Daniel's name. Danny Mercer, Miriam said. You came back too late. Kyle flinched at the bluntness. Daniel did not. Yes, Mom. Miriam studied his jacket. You still have that thing. Yes, Mom. And the dog? Atlas. Good dog, she said. Atlas lowered his head politely beneath her hand. Ruth placed the photo strip on Miriam's lap. We are trying to find Emily Rourke. Miriam stared at the pictures for a long time. Her fingers trembled over Michael's face. Poor girl, she whispered. She thought the town hated her husband's memory. Daniel's breath caught. Why would she think that? Miriam looked at him sharply. Because people told her you came home with his things, and no explanation. Because they said you were protecting yourself. Because nobody wanted to admit grief had made them cruel. Daniel held the booth photo in one hand and the sealed letter in the other. I wrote. It came back. I know, Miriam said. The room seemed to tilt. You know? Melissa asked. Miriam nodded slowly. Emily came to the church office before she left. She asked me to forward anything that arrived. But a few weeks later, a man came in and said mail for her should no longer be sent, said the family wanted privacy. Ruth leaned forward. What man? Miriam's mouth pressed into a thin line. Harold Voss. Daniel went still. Kyle frowned. Who is Harold Voss? Ruth answered without looking away from Miriam. Michael's cousin. Sold off the Rourke house after Emily left. Miriam's eyes filled with old anger. He said Daniel Mercer had failed Michael and that Emily should stop waiting for apologies from men who wore uniforms and hid behind them. The words hit Daniel with such force that Atlas immediately pressed against his leg. Miriam reached into a drawer beside her chair and took out a small address book, its cover cracked and taped. I kept more than I should have. Church women do that when men come in making decisions for grieving women. She opened to the R pages and pointed. Emily Rourke. Then an address crossed out. Beneath it, in faded pencil, another name. Emily Rourke Dawson. Kyle whispered. She remarried? Maybe, Miriam said. Or maybe she used a family name. She moved north. I sent one Christmas card. It did not come back. Daniel stared at the line until the letters blurred. Miriam touched his hand. You did not fail because the letter came back, Danny. But you did stop knocking. Daniel's eyes closed. The truth was not clean enough for comfort. He had tried. He had been blocked. Then he had folded the pain into a jacket and let the years make cowardice look like patience. When he opened his eyes, Kyle was looking at him differently. Not with pity, with the first uncomfortable beginnings of respect. "We can go north," Kyle said. Daniel shook his head. "We call first," Kyle nodded. "Then we call." Atlas rested his chin on Daniel's knee, and Daniel placed one hand on the dog's head. The secret in the jacket had led to the locker. The locker had led to Michael's message. Michael's message had led to Miriam. And Miriam had given them a name that could still open or close the promise forever. Emily Rourke Dawson. For 30 years, Daniel had carried the wrong question. He had asked whether he had failed. Now, with Atlas breathing steadily against his leg and Kyle standing silent beside him, he had to ask the harder one. If Emily was still alive, would she want the truth after all this time? The phone call did not reach Emily Rourke Dawson. It reached a voicemail box with a woman's voice that sounded older than Daniel had imagined and softer than memory deserved. "You have reached Emily Dawson. Leave your name, your number, and please do not hang up before the tone." Daniel stood in the hallway of Sunny Acres. He had thought hearing her name would be the hard part. He had not prepared for her voice. 30 years had made it thinner, but not unfamiliar. The tone sounded. Daniel's mouth went dry. Kyle stood beside him, ready to speak if his uncle could not. Melissa held the canvas pouch against her chest. Ruth watched from the end of the hall with Miriam Bell's address book open in both hands. "Mrs. Dawson, this is Daniel Mercer. You knew me a long time ago as Michael Rourke's friend. I found something today that belonged to him. Something he left for you. I am sorry it took me this long to call. My number is..." He stopped, his voice cracked on the last word. Kyle quietly took the phone, read Daniel's number, thanked her, and ended the call. Miriam looked up from her chair. "Now you wait." Daniel gave a tired breath. "I have done enough waiting." "No," Miriam said. "You have done enough punishing yourself. Waiting is different." They left Sunny Acres after Ruth promised to return the next day. Daniel climbed into the pickup slowly, one hand on Atlas's harness. The dog hopped in after him and settled close, leaving no space between his body and Daniel's hip. Kyle drove because Daniel's knee had swollen. Melissa sat in the back with the pouch on her lap. Then Kyle said, "I called you a liar." Daniel looked out the passenger window. "I did. In the garage. I said it like I had earned the right." "You said what you thought. That does not make it right." "No," Daniel said. "It does not." Kyle swallowed. "Why did you never tell me about Michael?" Daniel watched winter fields pass, brown and flat under a pale sky. "Because every time I began, someone wanted the short version. There is no short version of a promise." Kyle nodded once. "Then give me the long one." Daniel's hand moved to Atlas's head. "Not yet." The phone rang before they reached the garage. Daniel stared at the screen. Unknown number. His fingers froze. Melissa whispered, "Answer it." Daniel did. For 3 seconds, he heard nothing but air. Then an old woman said, "Danny? Emily." Kyle put it in park and stared straight ahead. Melissa covered her mouth. Emily's voice trembled. "Miriam called me too. She said you found something." "I did." "After all this time, yes." "Is it his?" Daniel looked down at the pouch in Melissa's lap. "Yes." Emily was quiet so long, Daniel feared the call had dropped. Then she said, "Harold told me you would never come." Daniel opened his eyes. "He said Michael left no message," Emily continued. "He said you came home, gave a statement to the family, and disappeared. He said you were ashamed to face me." Daniel pressed his palm against his knee until pain steadied him. "I came to town. You were gone. I waited 3 weeks. I came in the 4th. A small sound came through the phone. Not crying exactly. The sound of a door opening inside an old grief. I wrote," Daniel said. "The letter came back. Michael left a locker key. The station was closed when I tried again. Today Atlas found the letter in my jacket. Then we found the locker. Atlas, my dog." Emily gave the faintest broken laugh. "Michael, he said dogs were better witnesses than people." Daniel almost smiled. He was right. "What was in the locker?" she asked. "Your scarf, a photo strip, and an envelope from Michael addressed to you. "It is still sealed." Emily inhaled sharply. Daniel added, "I did not open it." "No," she whispered, "you wouldn't." Those two words took more weight off Daniel's chest than any apology could have. Emily lived 2 hours north, near the river. She said her daughter, Grace, would bring her to the old station next morning if the town would allow it. "The station?" Melissa whispered. Daniel repeated the question. Emily's answer came clear. "If Michael left it there, I want to receive it there." Tom Adler arranged the rest after 3 phone calls and 1 argument with the town manager. The demolition crew would pause for the morning. The station would remain closed except for escorted entry. That evening, the garage felt different. The jacket hung on the peg again, but no longer like a relic, more like a witness waiting to testify. Daniel fed Atlas from the blue bowl near the heater, filled his water, took his own pills with cold coffee, and sat on the cot in the back room where he slept when his knee hurt too much for the stairs above the office. Kyle did not leave. He swept the floor without being asked. He picked up the receipts he had scattered. He put the donation boxes in his truck and closed the tailgate on them as if ashamed of the cardboard itself. When he came back inside, Daniel was holding the sealed letter he had written 30 years earlier. Kyle stopped near the bench. "Are you going to open yours?" Daniel ran 1 thumb over the old seal. "It was meant for her too. Then give her both." Kyle's face was tired. "Younger now," because certainty had left it. "I thought clearing this place out would help you move on. I did not understand that some things stay because they still have work to do." Atlas walked over and nudged Kyle's hand. Kyle looked down, surprised. "I think he forgives faster than you do." Daniel gave a faint breath. Dogs do not waste time pretending they were never hurt. Kyle sat on the edge of a stool. "Can I come tomorrow?" "You carry the coffee," Daniel said. Kyle nodded, accepting the small job like it was an honor. Late that night, Daniel woke from a dream with his breath trapped in his chest. Atlas was already there, front paws on the cot, nose against Daniel's wrist. The dog did not bark. He simply stayed close until Daniel could hear the heater again, the wind outside, the quiet living world. Daniel put 1 hand over Atlas's neck. "Tomorrow," he whispered. Atlas rested his chin on the cot. The old letter had brought accusation. The locker had brought proof. Emily's voice had brought back the part of the promise Daniel thought had died. But tomorrow would bring the hardest thing of all. A woman who had waited in grief would stand in front of the man accused of failing her, and Daniel Mercer would have to place 30 years of silence into her hands without asking to be forgiven. The next morning, Union Station looked less abandoned and more ashamed. Orange cones blocked the curb. Tom Adler stood at the gate with a clipboard and the tight face of a man who had spent the morning arguing with people who loved procedure more than mercy. Ruth had arrived early with coffee and the red binder. Kyle carried the canvas pouch. Melissa carried Daniel's sealed letter in a folder. Daniel wore the green jacket. He had tried to leave it on the peg. Atlas had walked back, taken the sleeve gently between his teeth, and pulled once. Not hard, not dramatic, just enough. Daniel had put it on without speaking. Now, with the station in front of him, he felt every seam against his shoulders. It reminded him that promises did not care how old a man became before they were finished. A gray sedan pulled up behind Ruth's diner. A woman in her 50s opened the passenger door with careful patience. Emily Rourke Dawson stepped into the morning. Daniel knew her and did not know her. The young widow from the photo strip had been softened by time, not erased by it. Her hair was white now. A cane waited in one thin hand, but her eyes held the same directness he remembered. Atlas rose from beside Daniel and stood still. Emily noticed the dog first. "Atlas?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Mom. Her daughter, Grace." Looked from Daniel to Kyle. "My mother said there was something from Michael." "There is," Daniel said. Emily took 3 steps toward him. "Did you open it?" "No." "Either one?" "No." Tom cleared his throat. "Mrs. Dawson, we can allow a brief escorted entry. The building is unstable in sections, so please remain where I direct you." Emily gave him a look Daniel almost remembered. "Son, I waited 30 years for this station. I can follow a line on the floor." They entered through the side door in silence. Atlas walked at Daniel's left side. In the locker corridor, Tom had placed a folding table beneath a window where pale light fell through dust. Kyle set the canvas pouch on the cloth. Emily stood before locker 41. Grace tried to steady her elbow, but Emily lifted one hand. Not yet. She looked at Daniel. Tell me. Daniel's chest tightened. Michael gave me a letter and a key. He said if anything happened, I was to find you and bring you here. He said the locker held what he could not trust to mail. Emily looked at the metal door. He always hated mailing important things, Daniel continued. When I reached town, you were gone. I wrote to the address he gave me. It came back. I tried the number. It was disconnected. I came here again, but the station was under closure. Then years passed. That is not an excuse. It is what happened. Grace's voice was cold. My mother believed you chose not to face her. Daniel looked at her. I know. No, Grace said. You do not know. She believed Michael left no goodbye. She believed the man he trusted most came home with silence. Atlas pressed his shoulder against Daniel's leg. You are right, Daniel said. Kyle's head turned quickly. He had expected defense. So had Melissa. Daniel continued, I can explain what blocked me. I can show what I carried. But none of that gives your mother back the years she waited without his words. Emily's eyes filled. Give me the envelope. Kyle opened the pouch and removed Michael's sealed envelope. Daniel took it from him, then offered it to Emily with both hands. She did not take it at first. For one unbearable second, Daniel thought she would refuse. Then she touched the plastic sleeve and whispered, Michael's handwriting. Grace helped her sit. Emily opened the sleeve, then the envelope. Her fingers shook, but when Grace offered to help, Emily shook her head. I can do this part. She unfolded the letter. No one asked to hear it. No one leaned in. There are some words that belong only to the person they were meant to reach. Emily read in silence. Her face changed slowly. Grief did not leave it. But something hard around her mouth loosened. Her free hand went to the scarf and pressed it against her chest. Daniel looked at the floor. Atlas watched Emily. At last, Emily folded the letter and held it close. He told me to forgive you first, she said. Daniel's eyes lifted. Emily looked at him. He wrote that if you were standing in front of me with this letter, then you had done the hardest thing he ever asked of you. He wrote that I should not let anyone turn your silence into guilt before hearing you. Kyle closed his eyes. Grace stared at Daniel, no longer cold, only shaken. Emily reached for the second envelope, the one Daniel had written and failed to send. And this one? Daniel's voice was rough. Mine. May, it was always yours. She opened it carefully. She read only the first line aloud. Emily, I promised Michael you would hear the truth from someone who loved him. Then she stopped and read the rest alone. Daniel stood with his hands at his sides, the old jacket hanging from him like an unanswered question. When Emily finished, she looked toward locker 41, then at the scarf, then at the photo strip of herself and Michael. Harold told me you never came, she said. I came. I believe you. The words did not heal 30 years. They stopped the wound from being called a lie. Melissa began to cry without sound. Kyle looked at Daniel, as if the uncle he thought he knew had stepped out from behind a fog. Emily reached down toward Atlas. The German shepherd stepped forward only after Daniel gave a small nod. Emily placed her hand on the dog's head. You found what people buried, she whispered. Atlas stood still beneath her touch. Tom roofed his glasses. Mrs. Dawson, Mr. Mercer, the town can document the recovery. We can also hold demolition while the historical board reviews the locker wall. Ruth looked at Daniel. That wall should not come down without Michael's name on record. Emily looked at the locker. Not Michael's only. Everyone turned toward her. She held both letters against her chest. Daniel's too. If this place kept my husband's last words, it also kept Daniel's promise. Daniel shook his head once. No, this is for Michael. Emily's eyes were wet but steady. A promise carried for 30 years deserves a place to rest. Daniel could not answer. Atlas leaned against him again, grounding him in the cold corridor beside the locker that had waited longer than anyone had a right to ask. The truth had reached Emily at last. But outside the station, Another truth was waiting with sharper teeth. Harold Voss, the man who had told a widow that Daniel never came, still lived in town. By sunset, he would hear that the locker had been opened. By late afternoon, the story had moved faster than anyone wanted. Tom Adler filed a recovery note at the town office. Ruth called the historical board. By 4, a photograph of Locker 41 had reached half the people who still cared about Union Station. By 5, Harold Voss knew. Daniel was back at the garage when Harold's black SUV pulled into the lot. Atlas heard it first. The dog rose from his blanket beside the heater and placed himself between Daniel and the side door. He did not growl. He simply became still. Kyle looked up from the bench where he was sorting the cabinet contents into folders. "Expecting anyone?" "No," Daniel said. Harold Voss stepped inside without knocking. He was in his late 70s, tall, narrow, and dressed like a man who believed a clean coat could make old sins look respectable. He carried a leather folder under one arm. His eyes moved across the garage, taking in Daniel's jacket, Atlas, Kyle, and Melissa. "Daniel," Harold said, "I heard you open something that did not belong to you." Daniel's hand moved once, calming Atlas. "It belonged to Emily. That is a matter of interpretation." Kyle stepped forward. "No, it was addressed to her." Harold looked at him. "And you are?" "Kyle Mercer." "Ah, family." Harold's smile thinned. Dragging up private grief after 30 years does not make a man honorable. Daniel did not move. Harold opened the folder and removed a photocopy of an old document. The Rourke estate was settled. Personal property was dispersed. Whatever was found in that station should be turned over to the family representative. Ruth's voice came from the doorway. "You mean you?" Everyone turned. Ruth had come in with Emily and Grace behind her. Harold's face changed. "Emily," he said softly, as though softness could rewrite what he had done. Emily stood with both hands on her cane, the scarf from Michael's pouch folded around her neck. "Harold." He looked from the scarf to Daniel. "I was going to come see you privately." "No," Emily said. "You were going to reach Daniel first." Harold's jaw tightened. "I tried to protect you." Daniel heard the old sentence before it finished. The anthem of people who made decisions for someone else and called it protection. Emily's voice did not rise. "You told me Daniel never came." Harold looked around the room, measuring witnesses. "I told you what I believed was best at the time." Kyle let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "That is not an answer." Harold turned on him. "Young man, you do not understand what grief can do to a family." Kyle's face flushed. "No. But I am starting to understand what pride can do when it wears a nice coat." Harold pointed toward Atlas. "And this animal is part of the problem. Everyone is acting as if a dog pulling at a jacket proves history." Daniel's voice stayed low. "No." Atlas found the letter. The key led to the locker. The locker held Michael's envelope. "Miriam confirmed your name. Emily has the letters." Harold's face hardened. "Miriam is old." Ruth's eyes flashed. "Old is not the same as forgetful." Grace lifted her phone. "She gave us a recorded statement. She remembered your name clearly." Harold looked at Grace. "Accusations can damage families." Emily stepped forward. "You damaged mine when you let me believe Michael left me nothing and Daniel brought me nothing." For the first time, Harold had no polished sentence ready. Then he tried another door. "Emily, Michael was gone. You were breaking apart." Daniel came late, confused, unable to explain himself. "I thought cutting the whole thing off would help you move forward." Daniel felt every eye turn toward him. There it was, the version that almost sounded merciful. Emily looked at Daniel. "Were you confused?" Daniel answered honestly. "Yes." "Were you late?" "Yes." "Did you stop trying?" He looked down at Atlas. The dog looked back at him without judgment. "Yes," Daniel said. "After enough doors closed, I stopped knocking." Harold spread one hand. "You see," Daniel lifted his eyes. "But I did not lie to her." "You did." The garage fell silent. Harold's face reddened. "I handled a grieving widow the best way I knew how." "No," Emily said. "You handled a widow the way that protected your control of the story." Grace placed a folded paper on the bench. "County records show you sold the Rourke house 6 months after my mother left. You signed as a state representative, but my mother says she never understood what she was signing." Harold stared at the paper. "This is becoming ugly." "It was always ugly," Ruth said. "It just dressed well." Melissa stepped closer to Daniel. "Harold, why tell the family Daniel failed Michael?" Harold looked at her. "Because people needed someone to blame." Daniel absorbed that sentence with a strange calm. People needed someone to blame. For 30 years, he had been a convenient place to put grief, shame, paperwork, property, and silence. A quiet man with an old jacket made an easy myth. Kyle looked sick, and I repeated it. Daniel turned toward him. "You did not start it." "No," Kyle said, "but I carried it." Atlas walked to the donation box, sniffed it once, and returned to Daniel's jacket. The gesture was small, but everyone saw it. The dog had chosen the thing others called trash over the box meant to erase it. Emily saw it most clearly. "That jacket stays with Daniel," she said. Harold shut his folder. "This is a family matter." Emily's voice became steady as stone. "Michael was my husband. The letters are mine. The promise was Daniel's. You do not own any part of it anymore." Harold looked toward the door, but Tom Adler appeared there with the town manager and 2 members of the historical board. Tom removed his cap. "Mr. Voss, the board has voted for an emergency preservation hold on Locker 41 and the station wall." The town manager added, "Pending review. The demolition schedule is suspended." Harold stared. "Over a locker?" Ruth answered. "Over a promise." Daniel did not smile. Victory did not feel like winning. It felt like a room finally setting down a weight it should never have handed him. Emily turned to Daniel. "Tomorrow, I will read part of Michael's letter at the station." Daniel shook his head. "You do not owe the town that." "No," Emily said. "But the town owes you the truth." Atlas came back to Daniel's side and leaned against him. That morning, Kyle had asked whether Daniel forgot or lied. By evening, the answer stood in the garage with witnesses, letters, a locker key, and one loyal dog who had refused to let a jacket be thrown away. Daniel had failed to finish the promise for 30 years, but he had not betrayed it. The next morning, the station did not look like a place waiting to be torn down. It looked like a place holding its breath. Temporary lamps lined the locker corridor. A folding table stood beneath the old timetable board. Tom Adler had swept a narrow path through the dust, careful not to disturb the marks around Locker 41. Ruth brought coffee in a silver diner urn. The town manager arrived in a navy coat, speaking softly now, as if the brick walls themselves had become witnesses. Daniel arrived last after being awake since before dawn. He had fed Atlas, checked the dog's paws, taken his pills, and buttoned the old green jacket with old fingers. Kyle had driven, saying little. Melissa rode beside him with a small folder on her lap. Inside were Ruth's photographs, Miriam Bell's statement, and Tom's recovery note. No one had asked Daniel to speak. Outside the station, a few townspeople gathered behind the cones. Not a crowd, just enough faces to make memory uncomfortable. Some had heard rumors, some had repeated them, and some had only come because a demolition delay was the biggest thing to happen near Union Station in years. Atlas stepped down from the truck and immediately came to Daniel's left side. Kyle looked at the people, then at Daniel. "You still want to do this?" Daniel looked through the glass doors toward the locker corridor. Emily asked. "That is not what I asked." Daniel touched Atlas's head. "Want has little to do with it." Inside, Emily sat near Locker 41 with the scarf around her neck. Ruth gave Daniel a cup of coffee, but he held it without drinking. The historical board chair, a careful woman named Helen Price, opened a small recorder and stated the date, the location, and the purpose. She made it sound official because official language was what the town understood. "Mr. Mercer, Mrs. Dawson has requested that a portion of Michael Rourke's letter be read into the station record. She has also requested that your involvement in the recovery be documented. You are not required to say anything." Daniel nodded once. Emily unfolded Michael's letter. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "Emily," she read, "if Daniel brings this to you, then believe this before anything else. He did not leave me. He did not fail me. There are things I asked him to carry because I trusted his silence, more than I trusted the world to be kind. A collective breath moved through the corridor as people received a new shape for an old story. Emily stopped there. She folded the letter again and held it against her chest. "That is all I will share," she said. Helen Price nodded. "Thank you." Then Emily looked at Daniel. "Now they need to hear yours." Daniel's mouth went dry. "No," he said softly. Emily held up his letter, the one he had written and failed to mail. "You wrote it for me. I am giving part of it back to you." Daniel looked toward the exit. Atlas shifted beside him, his body pressing against Daniel's knee. Not holding him in place, only reminding him he was not alone. Emily read. "Emily, I promised Michael you would hear the truth from someone who loved him. I am sorry that truth is arriving with my hands instead of his. He made me promise not to let his last words become a form letter, not to let his life be reduced to a notice, and not to let anyone tell you he forgot home." Emily paused, then steadied. "I have the key he gave me. I have the place he named. I am coming as soon as I can." She lowered the page. Daniel stared at the floor. "I am coming as soon as I can." He had meant it. He had failed it. Both were true. Helen asked, "Mr. Mercer, may the station record note that this letter was recovered from the lining of your jacket by your dog, Atlas, and that the key led to locker 41? Daniel nodded. Kyle spoke before Daniel could. "Yes. And it should also note that I was the one trying to throw the jacket away." Kyle stepped forward. "I called it junk. I accused my uncle of hiding behind an old story. I called him a liar before I knew what had been buried in that jacket." Melissa whispered, "Kyle." "No, Mom, it matters." Kyle looked at the recorder. Atlas pulled the jacket from the box. Without him, we would have lost the letter, the key, and maybe the locker wall by tomorrow. Helen looked to Daniel. "Is that accurate?" "Yes." A man near the doorway cleared his throat. Daniel recognized him as the owner of the hardware store. "I remember folks saying Daniel came back and would not explain himself. I repeated some of that. I should not have." No one applauded. The apologies arrived awkwardly, late, and in pieces. That made them feel honest. Then Harold Voss appeared at the side entrance. The corridor tightened around him. He had not brought a folder, only a lawyerly posture without the lawyer. His eyes went to the recorder, the letters, and the people by the lockers. "I was told this was a board review," Harold said. Helen Price closed the recorder cover halfway. "It is. Then I object to personal accusations being entered into record without full context." Emily looked at him. "The context is that you lied." Harold's face hardened. "I made a judgment in pain." Grace stepped forward. "You told my mother Daniel never came. Mir says you stopped the forwarding. County records show you profited. What context improves that?" Harold looked at the crowd, then chose Daniel. "You want to stand there as if you are innocent?" Harold asked. "You still did not deliver the letter." Daniel felt the old shame rise. This time, he did not let it sit alone. "No," Daniel said. Daniel lifted his head. "I should have kept knocking. I should have found another way sooner. That is mine to carry." Daniel continued. "But I did not tell a widow she had been abandoned. I did not bury a man's last words. I did not turn a family's grief into control." Atlas stood then beside Daniel. Harold looked at the dog, then away. Helen Price reopened the recorder. "Mr. Voss, the board will not enter your objection as a correction unless you provide evidence disputing the recovered items or witness statements." Harold said nothing. Emily took Michael's letter and placed it on the table beside the scarf and photo strip. "There is your context." For the first time, Daniel did not feel the station asking him to defend himself. He felt it returning his name. By the time the board review ended, the people outside the station had grown quiet. No one seemed to know where to look. Not at Daniel, because looking at him meant admitting how easily a town could turn a quiet man into a rumor. Not at Emily, because her grief now had names, dates, and handwriting. Not at Harold, because his face had become the mirror no one wanted. Helen Price gathered the photographs and placed them in a folder marked Union Station Recovery. Tom Adler locked the corridor again. But this time the lock sounded different. It sounded like something being protected until the town learned how to speak of it properly. Daniel stepped outside with Atlas beside him. The air had warmed, but his hands were cold. Kyle walked behind him, carrying Ruth's coffee urn and folding chairs, because carrying small things without being asked was the only apology he knew. Emily came last, supported by Grace. Around her neck, Michael's scarf moved lightly in the wind. Harold stood near his black SUV alone. For a moment, Daniel thought the man would leave without another word. Then Harold crossed the gravel lot. Atlas noticed first. His head rose. His body shifted in front of Daniel, ready. Harold stopped several feet away. "I did not profit the way she made it sound." Daniel did not answer. Harold looked toward Emily. The house was falling apart. There were debts. People forget that. Emily held his gaze. People forget many things when forgetting protects them. Harold's jaw worked. "I was trying to keep the family from drowning." Grace's voice was even. "You let my mother drown alone." Harold turned away from her and looked at Daniel. "You know what it was like back then. Men came home different. Everyone wanted a clean story. Daniel's voice was tired, so you made one." Harold's eyes flicked to the jacket. "You were easy to blame." Kyle took one step forward. Melissa caught his arm. Daniel felt the old anger stir, but it did not rise the way it once might have. There was no use fighting a man who had finally said the truth by accident. "Yes," Daniel said. "I was." Harold looked almost relieved, as if agreement meant forgiveness. Daniel continued, "That does not make it right." The relief vanished. Ruth came out of the diner with a white paper bag in one hand. "Harold, you should go home." He looked at her. "You always did think you were the town's conscience." "No," Ruth said. "I just kept receipts when everyone else kept opinions." She handed the bag to Daniel. "2 sandwiches. 1 plain for the dog if you approve." Daniel gave the first small smile of the day. Atlas approves most food. The tension broke, but only slightly. Emily stepped closer to Daniel. "I am not asking for a public apology from him." Harold looked sharply relieved again. Emily added, "I am asking for the documents he kept." Harold froze. Grace lifted her phone. "The estate papers. Any letters. Any forwarded mail. Anything with Michael's or my mother's name." Harold straightened. "Those are private." Emily's hand tightened around her cane. "They are mine." Helen Price, who had not yet left, cleared her throat. "Mr. Voss, if documents related to the station recovery or the Rourke personal effects exist, the board may request copies for review." Harold looked from Helen to Tom to Ruth, then to Daniel. "This is what you wanted?" Daniel shook his head. "I wanted to give a widow what her husband left for her." "And now?" Daniel looked at Emily, then at Kyle, then at Atlas. "Now I want the rest of the truth to stop hiding in other people's drawers." Harold said nothing for a long moment. Then he opened his SUV, took out a small notebook, wrote an address, tore the page, and handed it to Grace. "My daughter has the boxes," he said. "I moved them to her attic after my sister died. I do not know what is in them anymore." Grace took the paper. "We will find out." Harold looked at Emily. His voice lowered. "I thought if you read his last words, you would never leave grief." Emily's eyes softened only enough to show she was still human. "I left grief with no map. You took the map." Harold looked away. There was no dramatic confession, no collapse, no grand punishment. Just an old man in a gravel lot, confronted by truth that did not need to shout because it had finally found witnesses. Daniel turned toward his truck. Kyle caught up to him. "Uncle Dan." Daniel stopped. "I am going with Grace to get those boxes," Kyle said, "if she lets me." Grace looked surprised, then nodded once. Kyle continued, "And after that, I want to help catalog what Ruth found, properly, not as junk." Daniel studied him. "You have work." "I can make time." "That is not the same as keeping a promise." Kyle absorbed it. "Then I will show up more than once." Daniel nodded. It was not forgiveness, not fully, but it was a door left unlocked. Atlas nudged Kyle's hand. Kyle bent and scratched behind the dog's ear. "You pulled me out of being stupid," Kyle murmured. Daniel opened the passenger door of the pickup, then paused. His knee throbbed, and fatigue pressed against his ribs. For years he had believed the hardest part would be proving he had not lied. Now he understood proof was only the beginning. After proof came repair, slower and more honest. Emily approached with Michael's empty envelope folded inside her purse. "Daniel," he turned. I want to keep the scarf and the photo strip, she said. They are yours. I want the locker tag preserved at the station. Daniel nodded. And the jacket, she said, looking at the faded green cloth. Keep wearing it. He looked down as if seeing it for the first time. Emily's voice trembled. For years, I thought that jacket meant you could not face me. Now I know it was carrying me. Daniel could not speak. Atlas leaned against him again. The old steady pressure that had carried him through darker rooms than this one. Emily touched Daniel's sleeve. Michael chose the right man, even if the right man got tired. Daniel closed his eyes. No one had ever said it that way before. Not innocent, not perfect, not excused. Right. And tired. For a man who had lived 30 years under the word failed, it was enough to make the morning tilt toward mercy. When Daniel opened his eyes, Harold's SUV was gone. The station was still broken. The town still owed more than it had paid. But Locker 41 would not be thrown away. The jacket would not be called trash again. And Atlas, who had begun by pulling one sleeve from a donation box, sat proudly at Daniel's side, while the people who had doubted his master learned that loyalty remembers what families, towns, and records forget. The boxes from Harold Voss's daughter arrived at Ruth's diner a little after 3. His knee had swollen enough that Ruth put a bag of ice wrapped in a towel beside his leg and threatened to call him stubborn in front of everyone if he refused it. He accepted the towel. He accepted the coffee. He did not accept the sandwich until Atlas placed his chin on the booth seat and looked at him with patient disapproval. All right, Daniel said quietly, I will eat. Kyle saw it and looked away, ashamed of how long it had taken him to understand that Atlas was not just company. The dog was a routine, a warning system, a witness, and sometimes the only reason Daniel remembered to take care of himself before taking care of the dead. Ruth placed a notebook on the counter. We inventory everything. Nothing disappears into pockets. Nothing becomes a family rumor again. Grace nodded, agreed. Emily sat beside Daniel with Michael's scarf folded in her lap. She had not left town after the station review. Grace had offered to drive her home, but Emily said she wanted to stay where the story had begun to correct itself. The first box held tax receipts, old utility bills, a cracked picture frame, and a stack of envelopes tied with yarn. Most were ordinary. Some were painful only because ordinary things survive when people do not. Then Kyle found the church mail packet. He stopped moving. What? Grace asked. Kyle held up a bundle of returned envelopes. These are addressed to your mother. Emily leaned forward. The envelopes were yellowed, but the names were clear. Emily Rourke. Emily Rourke Dawson. Some carried forwarded labels. Some were stamped undeliverable. One was Daniel's handwriting. Daniel reached for it, then stopped. That one came back to me. Grace turned it over. No. This one has the church office stamp. It reached town again. Ruth came closer. Let me see. She examined the postmarks under the lamp. Daniel mailed it. It was returned. Then sometime later, someone brought it or sent it to the church office. Miriam was right. Forwarding was interrupted. Emily's hands shook. Harold kept them? Grace's mouth tightened. He kept everything that made him look necessary. Kyle opened another envelope carefully. Inside was not a letter, only a note in Harold's handwriting. Do not forward. Family requests privacy. Ruth's face hardened. There it is. Daniel felt no triumph. He felt tired in a way that reached the bone. The letter had not simply failed. It had been stopped. Kyle placed the note on the counter as if it might burn him. I believed a story built on that. Daniel looked at him. Most people do until the paper turns up. Atlas shifted beneath the table. His ears lifted toward the box nearest Grace. The dog crawled out slowly and approached the last box. He did not bark. He sniffed the edge, then the seam where the tape had loosened. His nose stopped at one corner. He pawed once, carefully, then looked at Daniel. Ruth whispered, again? Kyle stepped back. Let him. Grace cut the tape. Inside were folded linens, a tarnished tie clip, an old address book, and a small metal recipe tin. Atlas ignored all of them except the tin. He sat in front of it. Emily let out a soft sound. That was Michael's mother's tin. Grace opened it. Instead of recipe cards, it held photographs. two small negatives, and a folded piece of paper wrapped around a dog tag. Daniel's breath stopped. The dog tag was not Michael's. It was Daniel's name stamped into metal, darkened with age. Kyle stared. "Why would Harold have your dog tag?" Daniel took it slowly. "I lost this before I came back to town." Emily unfolded the paper around it and read the first line. "Danny will come if he can. If he does not, look for what stopped him before you judge him." Her voice broke. "It is Michael's handwriting," she said. Daniel could not move. Grace read the rest silently, then handed it to Daniel. His eyes moved over the words, each one opening a room he had locked from the inside. Michael had written that Daniel had carried more guilt than any one man should be asked to carry. He had written that if Daniel arrived late, it would not be because he did not care. It would be because Daniel would try to do everything himself before admitting he needed help. Michael had known him too well. At the bottom was one more line. "Do not let Harold decide who loved me." Emily covered her mouth. Ruth turned away, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. Kyle sat down hard on a stool. He knew. Daniel looked at the dog tag in his palm. "Michael knew people better than I did." Grace's face had gone pale with anger. "Harold hid this too." "Not just hid," Ruth said, "preserved." "That is the part men like Harold never understand. They save the proof because they cannot stand throwing away the thing that gives them power." Daniel closed his fist around the dog tag, then opened it again. The metal had warmed against his skin. For 30 years, he had thought the worst evidence against him was silence. Now silence had a paper trail. Tom Adler came in while they were still documenting the tin. He removed his cap as soon as he saw Emily's face. "The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," he said. "They want to create a temporary exhibit. Locker 41, the tag, copies of the letters. They asked whether you would approve." Daniel shook his head. "This is Emily's decision." Emily looked at the dog tag in Daniel's hand. "No, this part is yours." Daniel frowned. "My name does not belong beside Michael's grief." Emily's eyes steadied. "Your name belongs beside the promise he trusted you with." Atlas came to Daniel and pressed his nose against the dog tag, then lowered his head to Daniel's knee. The gesture was small, but it settled the room. Kyle looked at the boxes, then at his uncle. "Tomorrow, when the board meets, I want to say what I did." Daniel's expression sharpened. "Do not perform guilt for strangers." "I am not." "Then why say it?" Kyle swallowed. "Because I called the jacket trash in the same town that called your silence guilt. I do not want the next person to learn from me that old things are worthless." Daniel studied him for a long moment. "Say less than you want. Mean more than you say." Kyle nodded. "I can do that." Outside the windows, people passed the diner more slowly than usual, pretending not to look in. By morning, everyone knew there were boxes, letters, and a dog tag. By evening, the town was learning that truth does not arrive as one clean document. It arrives in pieces, and each piece asks who had the courage to keep looking. Evening settled outside the diner windows. Ruth turned on the neon sign, though the diner was closed, because she said light was useful when truth had work to do. Daniel watched Atlas lie down beside the boxes, guarding them with the same quiet authority he had given the jacket. The dog had found the letter. The letter had led to the key. The key had opened the locker. The locker had led to Emily. Emily had led them back to Harold's boxes. And in the last box, beneath linens and a recipe tin, Michael had left one final defense for the man everyone had found easiest to blame. Tomorrow, Daniel's name would go before the board, not as a rumor, not as an excuse, as part of the record. The board meeting was held in the old community hall because the town office conference room could not hold everyone who suddenly wanted to remember correctly. Daniel disliked the crowd before he saw it. He felt it in the truck, in the way Atlas sat upright and watched his hands. His knee was swollen, his back hurt from 2 days of standing too long, and the old green jacket felt heavier than cloth had any right to feel. Kyle parked near the side entrance. "We can go in the back." Daniel looked at the front doors. "No, that is not why I am going through the front." Atlas stepped down first. Daniel followed with one hand on the door frame and one on the dog's harness. The German shepherd did not pull. He waited until Daniel's boots touched the sidewalk, then walked beside him. The murmurs began at once. Not cruel this time. Careful, regretful, curious. People said his name softly, as if trying it on after years of calling him something else in private. Daniel Mercer. Mr. Mercer. Danny. He kept walking. Inside, Helen Price had arranged the recovered items on a long table. Copies of the letters sat in clear sleeves. The locker tag rested in a small display tray. The photo strip had been enlarged beside a picture of Union Station before it closed. Daniel's dog tag lay on dark cloth, his name visible under the hall lights. He stopped when he saw it. Atlas stopped too. For many years, Daniel's name had lived in whispers and unfinished sentences. Now it sat beneath glass, like something the town had finally agreed not to misplace. Emily sat in the first row with Grace. Ruth stood near the coffee urn, arms folded. Tom Adler waited by the wall with his cap in his hands. Harold Voss was not there. Helen opened the meeting. We are here to review the emergency preservation hold on Union Station Locker 41. Daniel heard his name and looked down. Atlas leaned against his leg. Helen summarized the findings: a letter from Daniel's jacket, a key, a locker, Michael's sealed envelope, Miriam Bell's statement, the returned mail bundle, Harold's note stopping the forwarding, the recipe tin, Daniel's dog tag, Michael's second note. Each item was named. Each item had a place. Each item did one job and handed the truth to the next. A single paper could be dismissed. A story could be twisted. But objects, gathered carefully and witnessed honestly, made it harder for a lie to keep its shape. Then Helen invited Emily to speak. Emily rose slowly. Grace offered her arm. Emily accepted it, but her eyes stayed on Daniel. I do not want this town to make my husband into a decoration, she said. The room went still. Michael was not a plaque. He was a man who laughed badly in photo booths and folded his socks like it mattered. He left me words I did not receive, because people decided grief was easier to manage when the widow did not ask questions. Several people looked down. Emily continued, Daniel Mercer did not give me those words for 30 years. That truth hurts. But another truth stands beside it. He did not throw them away. He did not open what was mine. He did not turn Michael's memory into a story that made himself look better. He carried shame when other people had planted it, and when the door finally opened, he handed me everything without asking me to forgive him first. Daniel's throat tightened. Emily turned toward the display table. If there is to be a record, it should say my husband trusted Daniel. It should say Daniel tried. It should say others interfered. And it should say an old jacket and one faithful dog brought the truth back before the station wall was lost. Atlas raised his head. Helen thanked her. Then she looked toward Kyle. Kyle stood from the second row. He looked at Daniel first. I called the jacket trash. A few people turned. Kyle did not read from the paper. I thought I was helping my uncle by clearing out old things. I thought age made some objects meaningless. I thought a man could get stuck in the past just because he kept proof of where he had been. He swallowed. I was wrong. I did not find the truth. Atlas did. I did not protect Daniel's dignity. I questioned it. And I want the record to include that the first one to stand between that jacket and the trash box was not me. It was his dog. Daniel closed his eyes once. Kyle continued, quieter. I learned how easily disrespect can sound like concern. The hall was silent. Then Helen asked whether Daniel wished to speak. He did not. Every part of him wanted to remain seated, let the papers do the talking, and leave before sympathy became another kind of crowd. Atlas looked up at him. Daniel stood. The hall seemed to move farther away, but Atlas stayed solid against his leg. I was late, Daniel said. No one breathed loudly. I was late to Emily. I was late to the station. I was late telling my own family enough of the truth that they could stop believing the easy version. He looked toward Emily. I will be sorry for that until I am done breathing. Emily's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Daniel turned slightly toward the room. But I did not lie about Michael. I did not abandon his last words. I did not get the jacket because I wanted to live inside a war story. I kept it because some part of me knew there was unfinished work in it. He placed one hand on Atlas's head. This dog knew before I did that the jacket still had a job. A few people wiped their eyes. Daniel's voice grew steadier. Do not call every old thing junk because you do not know what it carries. Do not call every quiet man broken because he will not explain his worst day for your comfort. And do not wait 30 years to ask a kinder question. He sat before the room could make him into something larger than a man. Helen Price called for the vote. The motion passed unanimously. Locker 41 would be preserved. Copies of the letters and photographs would become part of a temporary station exhibit. The town would correct its record to state that Daniel Mercer had recovered and delivered Michael Rourke's personal message to Emily Rourke Dawson. The board would request Harold Voss's remaining documents for review. Demolition would remain suspended until the historical assessment was complete. No one clapped at first. Then Tom Adler stood, removed his cap, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." One by one, others stood too, not cheering, not celebrating, just standing. Daniel did not look around. He looked at Atlas, who sat calmly beside him as if this had been the natural outcome all along. For 30 years, the town had let silence accuse him. Now silence finally stood on his side. 2 weeks after the board vote, Daniel returned to Union Station without a crowd. The cones were gone from the curb, but the demolition signs were stacked near the gate, face down. Morning light fell across the brick wall. The old clock above the entrance still showed 20 after 3, but someone had cleaned the glass, and the station looked less like a ruin, and more like a question kept for the next generation. Atlas walked at Daniel's side, with his usual steady patience. Kyle carried a small wooden frame wrapped in brown paper. He had built it himself at the garage, after 3 failed attempts, and one long evening of learning that making something straight required more humility than tearing something down. Ruth unlocked the side door. "You are early." Daniel looked at the station corridor. "Did not want people watching. They will watch later. Later is their problem." Ruth smiled and stepped aside. The locker wall had been cleaned, not polished. Helen Price had insisted the rust remain visible because history should not be made too pretty. Locker 41 was open behind glass now. Inside sat copies of the pouch, the tag, the photo strip, and a short account of how the items were recovered. The real letters had stayed with Emily. The scarf had stayed around her shoulders. Kyle unwrapped the wooden frame. Inside was a simple brass plate. Michael Rourke's promise, recovered from Locker 41, delivered by Daniel Mercer. Found because Atlas refused to let an old jacket be thrown away. Daniel read it once, then looked away. "It says too much," he said. Kyle's face tightened. "No, it does not. It makes the dog sound smarter than the rest of us." Ruth folded her arms. He was. Atlas sat, unconcerned by praise. Helen arrived with Tom Adler carrying a small tool bag. Emily and Grace came a few minutes later. Emily moved slowly, but she looked stronger with Michael's scarf folded beneath her coat. In her hands, she carried a single white envelope. Daniel noticed it at once. Emily followed his eyes. "Not another secret. Good. A thank you note," she said, "for the display." Daniel shook his head. "You do not need to thank me. I know." She handed it to Helen, not to him. Tom mounted the frame beside the locker. The drill sounded loud in the quiet corridor, but Daniel did not flinch. Atlas leaned against him anyway, because the dog never waited for proof that comfort was needed. Daniel expected to feel relief. Instead, he felt the ache of all the years that could not be repaired by brass, glass, or kind words. Michael was still gone. Emily had still waited too long. Daniel had still stopped knocking. A town record could be corrected, but it could not return 30 winters. Seemed to understand. She stood beside him and said, "It is not enough." Daniel looked at her. "It is something," she said, "but it is not enough. That is why we keep it where people can see it." He nodded slowly. Later that morning, the station opened for 1 hour. No ceremony had been announced, but people came anyway. The hardware store owner, the diner waitress, 2 members from the VFW hall, a teacher with a small class. Melissa stood near the back, watching her brother more than the display. Harold Voss did not come, but a box did. Grace received it by courier at Ruth's diner and brought it unopened. Inside were the remaining Rourke papers, old mail, house documents, and 3 photographs Harold had kept for the oldest reason of all: control. On top was a note in Harold's handwriting. I was wrong. It was not an apology. Not really, but it was the first sentence he had written that did not try to manage the truth. Emily read it, folded it once, and placed it in her purse. Enough from him, she said. When the teacher asked whether Daniel would speak to the students, he almost refused. Then Atlas nudged his hand. Daniel looked down. You are enjoying this. The dog's ears lifted. Daniel faced the students. Do not make heroes out of people just because they suffered. The teacher blinked, surprised. Daniel continued, and do not make villains out of people just because they are quiet. Ask what they are carrying. Ask who handed it to them. Ask whether the story you heard was built by someone who wanted the truth hidden. One boy raised his hand. Was Atlas trained to find the letter? Daniel looked at the German Shepherd. No. He was trained by living with me. He knew what mattered because he watched what hurt. The boy nodded like that answer would stay with him longer than a lecture. At the end of the hour, people drifted out. Some thanked Daniel. Some only touched his shoulder. One older man from the VFW stopped before him and said, "We should have asked sooner." Daniel answered, "Yes." No comfort added, no absolution handed out too easily, just yes. By evening, Daniel was back at the garage. The green jacket hung on the peg above the workbench, but now the torn lining had been repaired with careful stitches. Not hidden. Repaired. A small piece of lighter thread marked the place where the letter had fallen out, a visible scar in the cloth. Kyle swept the floor while Daniel worked on an old generator. He had started coming 3 evenings a week. Sometimes they talked. Mostly they worked. Trust returned like an old engine, not with one turn of the key, but with patient hands, clean fuel, and time. Atlas lay on his blanket near the heater with his head on his paws. Daniel finished tightening a bolt and looked at the dog. You know they put your name on a plaque, Atlas blinked. Do not let it make you proud. Kyle laughed from the doorway. That night, before closing, Daniel took a small notebook from the cabinet and wrote Emily's current address on the first page. Beneath it, he wrote Kyle's number, Grace's number, Ruth's number, and the station file number. No more memory stored only in one man's head. No more promises hidden where love had to depend on accident. He closed the notebook and set it beside Mike, the red coffee tin of dog biscuits. Atlas rose and came to him. Daniel knelt carefully, both hands on the dog's neck. You remembered for me, he whispered. Atlas leaned his forehead against Daniel's chest. Outside, the sign over the garage flickered, then steadied. Mercer Auto and Small Engine Repair glowed against the dark road, old but still working. Daniel locked the door, put on the green jacket, and stepped into the night with Atlas beside him. He had not been made innocent. He had been made visible, and sometimes, for an old soldier whose name had been bent by silence, visible was the beginning of peace.